Matthew gripped the steering wheel tightly, his impatience growing with each passing moment. The air conditioner hummed softly, struggling to push back the oppressive heat of Kentucky's summer. A man accustomed to the comforts of wealth and success, Matthew had spent years in the world of business, accumulating both riches and influence. But today, none of that mattered as he found himself stuck on the side of the road, his tire flat and his pristine mansion miles away. His attempt to call for roadside assistance proved fruitless. No signal. With a sigh, he accepted the inevitable. He would have to wait. As frustration bubbled inside him, a figure appeared on the horizon, slowly making its way toward him. A young boy, no older than 13 or 14, was walking down the road. He was dressed in a faded t-shirt and worn sneakers, his expression serious and determined. Matthew observed the boy carefully as he approached, his eyes narrowing slightly as he appraised the situation. With a confident nod, the boy spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Got a flat, sir?" "Yes," Matthew replied, feeling both relief and unease stir within him. "I do. I was hoping for some help, but my phone has no signal out here." The boy gave a small smile. "I can help with that," he said, kneeling by the flat tire without hesitation. "My grandpa taught me how to change a tire last summer." "You got a spare?" Matthew pointed toward the trunk, watching as the boy opened it and gathered the necessary tools. With the precision and skill of someone much older, the young boy went to work, his hands moving quickly and expertly. Matthew stood by, observing, a strange feeling of humility creeping in. He hadn't felt this way in years, like he was witnessing something greater than the material wealth he had always relied on. When the task was finished, the boy wiped his hands on his jeans and stood back. "All done," he said with a small, satisfied smile. Matthew, impressed and grateful, reached for his wallet and pulled out some cash. "Here, take this," he said, offering the money. "I really appreciate your help." But the boy took a step back, raising a hand in polite refusal. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. Just happy to help." Matthew stood frozen for a moment, still holding the money in his hand. The boy turned and walked away, his figure receding down the road as Matthew watched, his mind spinning. There was something about the interaction that unsettled him, something deep and unspoken. He felt moved in a way he couldn't quite understand. Slipping the money back into his wallet, he climbed into his car. As he drove away, his thoughts kept returning to the boy, his quiet dignity, his self-assurance. It wasn't the kind of confidence built on wealth or privilege. It was something else, something deeper. That night, as he sat in his luxurious study, Matthew couldn't shake the memory of the boy. The walls of his mansion seemed suddenly cold and uninviting. The shelves of books he never read a silent testament to a life full of business dealings, negotiations, and transactions. In all his years, Matthew had never encountered anyone like the boy. Business was always about exchange, favors, deals, prices. But that boy had offered help without expecting anything in return. He had no need for money or recognition, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done something good. Matthew leaned back in his chair, sipping his scotch, the image of the boy's confident smile etched in his mind. The worn shoes, the faded clothes, the dust on his hands. They told a story. And yet, despite having so little, the boy possessed a kind of integrity that Matthew envied. The next morning, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain, Matthew found himself behind the wheel again, retracing his steps along the same road where he had met the boy. His mind raced with questions. What kind of life had the boy led? What kind of family had raised someone with such quiet strength? Hours passed as Matthew asked around at gas stations and diners, tried to find someone who knew the boy. Most people shrugged, but then at a small cafe, an older woman behind the counter spoke up. "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "That boy is always helping folks around here. He lives with his mama over in Harlan." "Harlan?" Matthew repeated, committing the name to memory. "Thank you." Harlan was an hour's drive away, nestled in the Appalachian foothills. The journey was scenic, but Matthew barely noticed, his thoughts consumed with the mystery of Elijah. What was it that had drawn him to the boy? When he finally arrived in Harlan, the town was peaceful and quiet, its modest homes and small businesses offering a sharp contrast to the hustle and bustle of Matthew's world. He asked around, and eventually, someone pointed him to a small house on the edge of town. The house was worn but well kept, the front porch sagging slightly under its own weight. Matthew parked his car, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what he would say, but something inside him urged him to find out more. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. It opened a moment later, revealing a woman in her early 40s. The woman who answered the door looked both tired and kind, her eyes sharp, taking in Matthew with a quiet curiosity. She stood in the doorway, measuring him with a glance, as if deciding whether he was a person worthy of her time. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice gentle but direct. "Good morning," Matthew said, clearing his throat. He felt awkward, unsure of how to proceed, but he pressed on. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday. Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire." At the mention of her son, the woman's expression softened instantly. The hard edge of suspicion melted away, replaced by a warmth that seemed to radiate from her. She smiled a small, knowing smile. "That sounds like my Elijah," she said with a touch of pride in her voice. "He's always helping folks out." Matthew nodded, grateful for her understanding. "I just wanted to thank him properly. He wouldn't accept anything from me yesterday, and I couldn't just leave it like that." Her eyes brightened as she stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. "He's out back," she said. "You're welcome to wait." Matthew stepped inside, his gaze taking in the modest surroundings. The house wasn't grand or impressive, but it had a comforting, lived-in feel. The furniture was old but clean, showing signs of care and use. Family photos lined the walls, some of them faded with age, and a few hand-drawn pictures caught his eye, likely from a much younger Elijah. The vibrant colors and innocent shapes contrasted sharply with the sterile, carefully curated decorations in his own home. Despite the simple furnishings, there was a warmth to this house that Matthew hadn't noticed in a long time. It wasn't the opulence he was used to, but it felt full of life, full of love. He followed her out to the backyard, where Elijah was busy repairing the fence. The boy looked up, surprised to see Matthew standing there. "Hey, mister," Elijah called out, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Matthew smiled, but he couldn't help feeling slightly nervous. The boy had made such an impression on him, and now, standing in this modest backyard, he wasn't sure how to express what he was feeling. "I want to thank you again," he said, his voice a little unsure. "You helped me when I really needed it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." Elijah shrugged, his expression easy and genuine. "It wasn't a big deal," he said with a casual wave of his hand, as if helping someone with a flat tire was just a normal part of his day. But to Matthew, it was a big deal. It had felt like a turning point, a shift in his perspective, and he was determined to make sure Elijah knew just how much his simple act of kindness had meant to him. Elijah leaned against the fence, his gaze curious as he watched Matthew. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was quiet, filled with a kind of unspoken understanding. Matthew, for the first time in a long time, felt out of place. The boy's calm demeanor made him feel like he was the one being judged. Finally, Matthew broke the silence. "I don't think you realize what a big deal it was," he said, his voice steady but with an undertone of something deeper. "People don't usually help strangers without expecting something in return." Elijah tilted his head slightly, looking at Matthew as if he hadn't quite understood the statement. "I don't see it like that," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "If someone needs help and I can do it, why wouldn't I?" Matthew was taken aback by the simplicity and honesty of the boy's logic. It was so straightforward, so untainted by the complications and expectations that often clouded his own thinking. He looked past Elijah to the yard behind him. The fence was made of mismatched planks, some patched together with care, but others showing the wear of time. The grass, once lush, was sparse, with patches of dirt where it had worn away. Behind the house, an old swing set leaned precariously, its chains rusted and broken. The yard was nothing like the manicured lawns of the wealthy neighborhoods Matthew was used to, but a character, a story of survival and resilience. Elijah's family clearly didn't have much, but they made do with what they had. They didn't complain. They worked with what they were given, finding contentment in the simplicity of their lives. Matthew thought of his own childhood, raised in a house much like this one. His parents had worked tirelessly, struggling to make ends meet. They had taught him the value of hard work, of persistence in the face of adversity. Yet as he grew older and climbed the ladder of success, he had somehow drifted away from those lessons, distracted by the pursuit of wealth and status. Standing in this modest backyard now, he felt a pang of nostalgia and strangely regret. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Matthew said, his voice warm with admiration. "Your mother must be proud." Elijah grinned and glanced back toward the house. "She works hard," he said simply. "I just try to help out where I can." Matthew fell silent for a moment, processing the boy's words. He had spent so many years chasing success, yet he hadn't learned what Elijah seemed to know instinctively, that there was more to life than money and material things. The boy's humility, his self-assurance, and his quiet sense of duty left Matthew feeling as though he had missed something essential in his own life. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," Matthew said at last, his voice firm. He wanted to offer something, to give back in some way, even if it wasn't the same as the help Elijah had given him. Elijah straightened up, his expression cautious now, as if unsure of Matthew's intentions. "We're okay, mister," he said, shaking his head. "We don't need anything." "It's not about need," Matthew insisted. "It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to return the favor." Before Elijah could respond, his mother appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Elijah, you better come inside and wash up before lunch," she called out, then turned her gaze to Matthew. "Would you care to join us?" she asked, her tone warm and inviting. "It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome." Matthew hesitated, unaccustomed to such an invitation, but there was something in her voice, something sincere and genuine, that left him no room for excuses. "I'd like that," he said, his voice quieter now, following her into the house. Inside, the kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread, the warmth of the oven mingling with the aroma of a home-cooked meal. It was a smell that took Matthew back to his own childhood, to simpler times when the most important things in life weren't possessions, but moments shared with the people you loved. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the house, blending with the warmth of freshly baked bread. The table was small, surrounded by mismatched chairs, but each piece was placed with care. It was a simple setting, far removed from the grand dining rooms Matthew was used to, but it carried a kind of charm that made him feel both out of place and strangely at home. Matthew took a seat, feeling a bit awkward in his tailored suit. The contrast between his polished appearance and the modest surroundings was stark, but he couldn't help but feel a pull toward the simplicity of a moment. As he sat there, waiting for the others, he noticed the soft hum of the house, laughter, the clink of silverware, and the quiet rustling of everyday life. It was a world far removed from his own. Elijah appeared a moment later, having washed his hands at the sink. His easy smile never faltered, and he settled into his seat with a natural ease, as if the atmosphere of the home was something that welcomed him with open arms. There was no pretense, no sense of needing to impress anyone. It was clear that this was a space where everyone could simply be themselves. As they ate, Matthew found himself drawn into their conversation. Elijah talked animatedly about his school, his friends, and his dreams of becoming an engineer. He spoke with the kind of passion and excitement that only a young person could possess, completely unclouded by the cynicism that sometimes creeps into adulthood. His mother, too, shared stories about the community, speaking with a quiet pride about the people who looked out for one another. There was a deep sense of belonging in her words, a recognition that in a place like this, people matter more than things. Matthew listened intently, absorbing the easy flow of conversation. For all his wealth and success, for all the grandiose achievements in his life, his own home felt cold and empty in comparison. The luxury of his estate, the finely curated decor, the grand dinner parties, all felt distant and hollow now. This small house, though modest in every way, was full of warmth, connection, and life. It was something Matthew hadn't realized he was missing until he stepped into this world. As they cleared the table, Matthew turned to Elijah's mother, who had risen to help with the dishes. "You've done a remarkable job raising him," he said, his voice sincere. "He's got more heart than most people I know." She smiled at the compliment, her eyes shining with gratitude, but there was also a quiet sadness behind her gaze. "Thank you," she said softly. "He's a good boy, but we've had our struggles. We've learned to appreciate the small things." Matthew nodded thoughtfully. He could sense the weight of her words, the resilience that she and Elijah had carried with them through difficult times. It was a kind of strength that was born not from wealth or privilege, but from hard work, love, and perseverance. His mind began to turn over ideas. He didn't want to overstep, didn't want to make any promises he couldn't keep, but he couldn't leave without doing something for this family. They had given him a gift, a reminder of what truly mattered, a lesson he hadn't realized he needed. It was time for him to return that kindness. Matthew left their home that afternoon with a sense of clarity that had eluded him for years. As he drove back to his estate, his thoughts were consumed with the idea of what he could do for Elijah and his mother. This wasn't about charity, not about simply handing them money or offering some empty gesture. This was about honoring the boy's selflessness and the family's resilience. They deserved more than patched fences and worn furniture. They deserved stability and recognition for the strength they showed every day. The next morning, Matthew began making calls. Lots of them. He reached out to old colleagues, contractors, and suppliers, determined to turn his plan into reality. By midday, a plan was set in motion. Within a week, trucks and workers began arriving at Elijah's home, and Matthew stood on the sidewalk with a clipboard in hand, directing the renovations. Elijah and his mother watched on the front porch, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief as they saw the crew unload supplies. "You didn't have to do this," Elijah's mother said, her voice trembling. "We've managed fine on our own." Matthew turned to her, his expression earnest. "You've done more than manage," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've thrived, but you gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Let me give back." Elijah was quieter than usual, standing next to his mother, a thoughtful look on his face. Matthew knelt slightly, meeting Elijah's gaze. "You taught me something, Elijah," he said softly. "Helping people isn't about money. It's about showing up. I want to show up for you." Over the next several weeks, the house underwent a transformation. The sagging porch was replaced with sturdy wood. The roof was repaired, and the rusty swing set in the backyard was replaced with a brand new one. Inside, the walls were painted, the floors polished, and the kitchen was upgraded with modern appliances. Every inch of the house was touched with care, with the goal of creating a safe, stable, and welcoming home for Elijah and his family. At first, Elijah tried to help with the renovations. He carried planks, swept debris, and offered whatever assistance he could. But Matthew insisted he take a break. "Your job," he said with a smile, "is to enjoy being a kid for a little while." Still, Elijah couldn't resist sneaking out to watch the crew work. His eyes lit up with curiosity as he observed the workers measure, cut, and build. One of the workers, a burly man named Joe, noticed Elijah's interest and invited him to help measure with planks. Before long, Elijah was asking questions about tools, construction, and how things were built. His excitement was infectious, and the workers welcomed him into their world. Matthew watched from a distance, a warm pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something meaningful, something that went beyond the confines of his business empire. The boy's energy reminded him of the ambition he once had before life became a blur of boardrooms and stock portfolios. Elijah's curiosity and eagerness to learn were a reminder of the dreams he had once pursued before they were swallowed by the pursuit of money and status. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the project neared its end, Matthew stood on the porch with Elijah and his mother. They marveled at the transformation. The house, which had once been a place of necessity, now looked like a home, a space that spoke of care, warmth, and stability. Elijah's mother turned to Matthew, her voice choked with emotion as she looked around at the new home they had been given. "This isn't just a house anymore," she said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It's a home." Matthew looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. "You and Elijah deserve this," he said quietly. "You taught me what really matters." As they stood there together, In the fading light of the day, Matthew knew he had done something far more important than any business deal or financial transaction. He had built something lasting, something that would matter far beyond the walls of the house. He had helped create a space where love, laughter, and dreams could grow, just as Elijah and his mother had done, against all odds. "I don't know how we could ever thank you," Elijah's mother said. Her voice choked with emotion. Her eyes shimmered with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief as she looked at Matthew. Matthew smiled softly, shaking his head. "You already have," he replied, his tone gentle. "You reminded me of what life is supposed to be about: family, connection, and purpose. I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day of the renovation project felt almost like a celebration. The transformation of the house was now complete, and the neighbors began to trickle in, drawn by the changes. They brought with them smiles and small gifts, fresh baked bread, jars of homemade jam, and even a potted plant for Elijah's mother. The air was filled with the kind of community spirit that was rare in Matthew's usual circles. Elijah's laughter rang out across the yard, echoing off the freshly painted walls. He raced around, showing his friends a new swing set and proudly pointing out the rooms inside the house that had once been tired and worn, but now radiated life and vibrancy. It was a joy to watch him, his excitement contagious. He had grown up in a house that had seen its fair share of hardships, but now it was filled with possibilities. Matthew stood on the front porch, leaning against a sturdy new railing, taking in the scene that unfolded before him. He hadn't felt this kind of joy in years, simple, unfiltered joy that came from seeing others thrive. He could feel it deep in his chest, an emotion so raw and pure that it reminded him of what life could be when people worked together, supported each other, and helped without asking for anything in return. As he stood there, Elijah's mother walked over with a glass of iced tea in her hand. She offered it to him with a smile that seemed to convey more than words could express. "You've done more than fix a house," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You've given us hope. And I think you found something for yourself, too." Matthew took the tea, his fingers brushing hers as he accepted the glass. He nodded slowly, taking a sip as he thought about her words. "I have," he admitted quietly. "I spent so many years chasing things I thought mattered: money, status, influence. But none of it feels like this. None of it ever filled me the way this has." It was true. The wealth, the power, the influence he had accumulated over the years seemed distant now. All of it had felt necessary at one time, but it hadn't brought him the sense of fulfillment he'd experienced in the past few weeks, helping this family rebuild their home, their lives. There was a deep, soul-nourishing contentment that came from this kind of work, a satisfaction that transcended anything his financial successes had ever offered. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting the yard in a warm golden light, Elijah joined him on the porch. His energy was still boundless, a lively spark in his eyes that seemed to light up the whole scene. He looked at Matthew, his expression thoughtful, as if he were weighing the words he was about to say. "Mr. Matthew," Elijah began, his voice earnest and full of determination, "I've been thinking a lot about what you did for us. I want to do something like that one day. I want to help people, too." Matthew's heart warmed at the boy's words. He placed a hand gently on Elijah's shoulder, offering him a smile that was as genuine as the boy's ambition. "You already are Elijah," he said, his voice steady and full of pride. "Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat together in silence, watching the sky shift from a soft gold to a deep orange as the day gave way to night. The warmth of the sun lingered, but there was a deeper warmth now, one that came not from the weather, but from the connection they shared, an unspoken understanding between them that they were forever changed by what had transpired. When it was time for Matthew to leave, Elijah and his mother walked with him to his car. Elijah's wide grin and his mother's tearful smile were etched into Matthew's memory, a reminder of the profound impact they had had on him. As he drove away, a sense of peace settled over him. He realized that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new chapter in all their lives. The weeks that followed brought more changes. Elijah's newfound curiosity about construction blossomed into a passion. Matthew, seeing the boy's eagerness to learn, arranged for him to spend time shadowing the workers who had helped with the renovations. Elijah soaked up every bit of knowledge, his enthusiasm making it clear that he was born for this kind of work. He asked questions about tools, about materials, and about how things were built. His curiosity was a spark that would continue to burn, propelling him toward his dreams. Matthew, in turn, found himself drawn back to Harlan again and again. Each visit felt less like a business trip and more like a return home. He no longer felt like an outsider in their lives. He was part of something bigger now, a community, a purpose, and a friendship that would last far beyond the walls of the house. His visits were no longer about charity, but about genuine connection. He was no longer just a wealthy man trying to make himself feel good. He was a man who had found something real, something that mattered. For the first time in years, Matthew felt content. His life, once full of transactions and deals, now felt filled with meaning. He didn't need to chase after more wealth or recognition. He had found something far more valuable, a sense of purpose, and the joy of giving without expecting anything in return. The story ended where it had begun, in a small town with a big heart, a place where one simple act of kindness from a young boy had reminded an old man of life's greatest lesson. It wasn't about what you have, it was about what you give. The boy's generosity had set in motion a chain of events that brought everyone closer together, a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest acts have the greatest impact. As Matthew continued to make his visits to Harlan, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. What had started as a flat tire on a dusty road had turned into something far greater, a story of generosity, selflessness, and connection that would shape all their lives for years to come.